function onto a list. And here, what a function does is it transforms data. So here we're just turning the strings of numbers into like actual numbers. And then map, it actually doesn't give us a list. It gives us something sort of close to a list. So what this list function does is it turns it into, like a normal Python list. And the same thing happens um, for the y's, right? The third line. So now we have all the x's and all the y's, and now we're trying to find the maximum square of the distance, right? So how many of you guys know what the Pythagorean theorem is? Can you guys tell me in chat if you guys know what the Pythagorean theorem is? I see a lot of a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That is good. So yeah, as you guys might see in this problem statement, it's asking you to find the maximum Euclidean distance, right? Now that might sound very complicated. However, Euclidean distance, let's say you have one point here and one point there on a coordinate plane. You're just finding the distance of the straight line between those points. And what you can do is you can actually think of a triangle when you're trying to find the distance. So think of it as two legs of a triangle. So you just get the distance between the x coordinates and the y coordinates, and then you use those to find c. Right? This is a and b. This would be c, and then c will be your distance. And we know that c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And here it's asking for the square of c, the square of the maximum Euclidean distance. So we don't even need to take a square root. We just find a squared plus b squared. And the maximum value of a squared plus b squared will be our answer. So here, what this loop is doing is it's doing a brute force search. So what that means is it's checking every single combination of pairs and checking which one has the greatest Euclidean distance, which one results in the highest, Pythagorean theorem value for c squared. So as you can see, there's two loops, right? Because we had to find a pair of points, so that's two. So here, first of all, we iterate through range n. And we find a first pair of points. And then inside this loop, we also go in a second loop, and we iterate through j. And then that's our second pair of points. So xi, and yi are first points, and then xs and then dx and dy are calculated based on the second pair of points in conjunction with the first pair of points. And then here you can see d2 equals dx times dx plus dy times dy. That's just squaring, right? Squaring is multiplying something by itself. So here we're just finding a squared plus b squared. And you can see this final if statement. If distance squared is greater than maximum distance squared, we set the maximum distance squared variable to what we found. And that's basically just trying to find the largest distance squared, because that's what we want to print, right? And we initially set it to 0 because 0 is the lowest our answer can go. And yeah, eventually, it checks through all points. It finds the Pythagorean Euclidean distance, the squares of the Euclidean distance, since we're not using square roots, across all points through this brute force search using a nested for loop, and then we print the answer. So yeah, do you guys have any questions about this program? Anyone in chat? Any questions? What does the J mean? So when you're using any programming language and you're trying to iterate over indices or values of an array, you commonly use variables that start from I. So I, J, and K. And you might say it's a bit arbitrary, right? But I guess the same thing can be said for algebra, right? Why do we start at X and then we have a variable for Y, and why do we have a variable for J? The same thing applies really for loops and loops in general with programming languages like Python. So here it's going from J in range I plus 1 to n. So it's finding every value. It's iterating through every index, starting from I plus one um, to the end. Does that answer your question? Okay, that's good. And in here you can see for the sample input, your answer should have been um, that's a big number, 1,059,112. So yeah, here it just checked, it checked this point, this first point with the second point, the first point with the third point. It checked the second point with the third point. So that's a brute force search. Checked every combination of those pairs. So now we're running a bit behind on schedule. Let's actually go into web development. So first we'll be starting with what web development actually is, right? So can you guys tell me in chat what you think web development is? Type out what do you think is developing a web. All right. Creating websites. That is a major part of it. Yes. And that's what we're covering. Website coding. All right. So we're gonna start out with a quote first. That I found that was a pretty cool one. That's very relevant to web development, and that's one by Paul Cookson. And what he said is that websites promote you 24/7, and no employee will do that. So these websites, they're run by code, and code, it doesn't need food, it doesn't need sleep. It's usually always going to be on, um, with exceptions for like an outage. So yeah, websites are really powerful in that sense. They're always available for anyone who wants to access them. So actually going into what web development is. Web development is the work involved in making a website for the internet. So a website is a collection of web pages, and so you guys might ask, what's a web page, right? So a web page is a document on the web, and you can access this through a web browser like Chrome or Firefox or Opera. I think is another web browser, and then you might be asking, how does web development benefit you, right? And there's a lot of websites in this world, so the answer is actually pretty obvious. First of all, we have Google, right? Google is one of the most famous examples of a website. You ask a question, you get an answer. We have Google Classroom, right? So you guys probably use this a lot of the time in your class, in the school setting, right? To manage and keep track of all of your assignments for any particular day. And then news. You might go onto like a news page and see what the latest advancements are in whatever politics or technology. And then YouTube. Maybe you watch a lot of YouTube videos. So, what can you guys do by learning web development? Um, web development is very useful. First of all, you can make a business, and how connecting back to the earlier quote, um, a website like promotes you 24/7. A customer can purchase something from your website at any point in the day. You don't need to like schedule a call with them, and this is how websites like Amazon work. And then second of all, you can do web development for an organization. So connecting back to Google, right? Google developers are paid very high salaries, and the reason for that is their websites are so huge and they bring in so much revenue. So they can they can pay very nicely to the developers who make Google and related services. And more on that, some web development jobs. There's a front end developer. Massive websites, I agree. So a front end developer develops what the user sees. So if you take my phone for example, right? This is the front end. This is what the user sees, right? They see a lock screen, they see the time, they see some notifications, and two buttons, right? A camera and a flashlight button. So that's the front end. It's the most like normal part of a website. It's what you think of when you see a website. There's also a back end. So what the back end does is it's basically a server, and backend developers design the server. So, for example, when you're sending a text to your friend, it has to go through a server to go to your friend. The phones don't connect. They don't communicate directly to each other. They have to go through a server. That's sort of like the middleman between everything. There's a full stack developer. So the full stack developer is just a mix of front end and back end. And then software engineer is more of a broad term, and it's basically what it says. You can develop any type of software. It's sort of a catch-all term and commonly used in big tech companies. And then next, we're going to move on to the client server model. So as I was saying, there's a server that's the middleman in a lot of these things, in these websites. So yeah, websites have two parts. They have the front end, which is what you're seeing, and the back end, which is the server. So yeah, when you go onto a website, what you're doing before you can even see anything is you send a request to the website server, and what the server does is it gives you back some files. It gives you the code for the website and how to render it and make it into something you can see. So it gives you back this file, and what your browser does is it executes this code and it turns it into that website. So that's one of the most basic parts of a client server model, not even accounting for interactions after you've loaded that website. So, for example, let's say you go onto Chrome, and a web browser, and you type in google.com. So, you instantly see the website, but you don't really think of why that is. Well, how it actually works is when you type out google.com and you press enter, you send a request to the Google server. And what the Google server does is it sends the code, which are the instructions for how to build a website, back onto your computer. And then what your browser does is it executes that code and turns it into a beautiful web page, as shown on the right, where you can, search for whatever you want. So, as I was saying, the server sends instructions to your device, right? And so the big question is, what programming languages are those instructions in? Well, there's a bit of a trifecta when it comes to the bare bones of what websites are made with. There's HTML, which the latest version is 5. There's CSS, which the latest version is version 3, and there's JavaScript. So can anyone tell me what these first two languages, what their acronyms are? What does HTML stand for? You put it in chat. Any ideas? Protects markup language. All right. And then how about CSS? Don't look it up. Computer science something. Not quite. Computer science. Yeah, not quite. Cascading style sheets. That is correct. All right. So yeah, HTML stands for hypertext markup language. We'll cover that later. And CSS is cascading style sheets. But that later, as I was saying, what we need to do right now is also cover some backend examples of languages and frameworks. So first we have Node.js. So JS is the same as from here, but it's a custom engine, as they call it, for the backend. So this is JavaScript for server hypertext markup language. Oh yeah, Ethan, do you have a question?
Isn't Node.js also like used to make JavaScript into a functional language that you can use not just for websites?
Yes, you can use server-based languages like Node.js for basically anything. Um, any type of algorithm. You could probably even do machine learning with Node.js, even though the main usage of Node.js is to make servers. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. So HTML, you see this guy on the right? His name is Tim Berners-Lee. He made the web. He made HTML. I don't think he made JavaScript, but he made a lot of stuff. So yeah, HTML stands for hypertext markup language. And you guys see markup, that means it's not a programming language. That's because HTML, it's not as much of logic and calculate performing calculations as much of a structure for a website. It codes the structure for how a website should look. And so one of the main things about HTML is that they use tags. And what tags are they have these elbow brackets, and they have some text inside them. So for example, you can have elbow bracket H1 and enclosing elbow bracket, and that would be a tag. It would be an example of a header tag, which is how you show text. So here are a bunch of examples of tags. You have H1, that's your largest tag. That's going to be for large header text. So that's like big titles. H2 is slightly smaller, and H3 is even smaller, and so on and so forth, until H6. Then we have P, which is how you write paragraphs. So maybe in a blog post you have a header, right, a big title, and then your blog text is going to be those P tags. Then we have A tags, which are a bit unintuitive to their name, but A tags are used for links. For example, if you click on a link, and then B tags, more intuitive maybe. It's used to bold text. I tags are used to italicize. U tags are used to underline text. There's a tag called button. It's undercase. All undercase. Yes. Yeah, undercase. I think it's the term. Um, for buttons, right? So button closing. Then we have UL and LI. So UL, basically what it makes is a list, and then you can list elements inside. So that's basically what a nested elements are, and you can put elements in elements. That is what UL and LI can do. And then I see a question here. Check it. Are we going to be coding on an HTML platform today? Yes, we will be using W3 Schools. That is directly into what we're doing next. So I will put these links into chat, and I encourage you guys to click on them and try it yourself. So here, this is an example of an HTML editor, right? It's not like the most advanced thing ever, but it's pretty easy to um, get your feet like into the water, I guess is a good analogy. So for example, here's a header tag, and then we also had to close header tags. I forgot to mention this, but if you we had to close tags in general. So for example, here I defined a header tag, which is how we make a big title, and then we had to close it, and whatever we have inside of it is the text that shows. So here I say hi, and it shows hi, right? And then we can make, for example, a paragraph. And let's say the paragraph says, this is a paragraph. Close. Boom. We have a header, and we have a paragraph. Let's say we want to make this italicized, or maybe we want to make it underlined, right? Let's underline this text. Boom. And then let's say we want to make a link. So I'm not sure if this link will work right now, but what we can do is we can add a link to somewhere else. So let's say we want to go to google.com. We can click on this, and it opens Google. See, simply amazing. And let's see what we have next. So you guys might be wondering, right? What is this, doc type HTML? What is this HTML? What's this head tag? What is the body tag? So HTML, it involves a lot of boilerplate. So boilerplate, what is this? Is it's a bunch of structure that is not directly used, and you can directly used for you to see, but it's very important for how the website is structured. So what this first tag is, this tag doesn't actually have to be closed, but it's exclamation mark doc type HTML. It lets the web browser know that you're using HTML5, so it knows how to execute the code. The HTML tag, which you do have to close, it says that this is the start of your code and you should put everything inside. The head tag is where you put meta things related to the website, like the title of the website or the icon of the website. And then the body is where the bulk of your code goes for what the user sees. So I have a little challenge for you guys. I want you to put this into Google Meet's chat, but can you make a large header text that says your name that has to be both bolded and underlined? It's not Zoom. It is Google Meets this time around. How do you do href? So href is what's called an attribute. I think we'll cover it later. But what you can do is you can just put something next inside of your tag, like an href, and you can set it equal to google.com. And you can click on it. So we have Sarita, who has successfully accomplished my challenge. And let's go. That works. We got Joel. Let's take a look at if Joel's code works. Amazing. And then let's have Santre. You got your code working, but keep in mind this is not nested correctly. So you see how the B is outside of the U here, right? So the B should also be outside of the U here. So this is not exactly in correct order, but luckily HTML is a bit generous. It won't raise it. HTML does not raise errors, which is very nice. So this is the correct ordering. It's sort of like parentheses, right? If you open a parenthesis, you want to close it. You don't want to do this. You don't want to close it twice and then open it. This is not balanced. If that's the closest thing I can think of as an analogy. Parentheses. You need to balance the parentheses. And then slashes shows it ends, and that's about it for the challenge. And speak of the devil, we're going to talk about attributes. So when you make a tag like an img tag, which we're going to be covering next, you can add these little keywords like src or href, and then set it equal to something. So for example, with href, as shown below, you can make the link click to something. So for example, here there's a link that says visit W3 schools. And if you click on it, you get sent to the W3 schools website. And in this example, you have the image tag and you set the source equal to image_girl.jpg. And I'm assuming it'll make an image of a girl. Wait, Santre, you have a question?
So on the bottom, the A in front of the link, it's not covered by those greater than less than signs on both sides. Is there a reason for that?
So there are, in fact, greater than and less than signs on that A tag. It's just a bit harder to see. So you guys can see my mouse cursor, right? Take a look over here. That's the starting, and that's the end. So what we're doing is we're just basically extending that tag by adding this huge thing in between. The href equals this, but the tag is the same. So here I'm going to give you guys some examples. So I encourage you guys to try this out yourself. Let's say, what it is, image girl.jpg. They did. And boom, that shows an image, right? And then let's say we have a link. Let's click out of this. href equals, and where do you want to go? Let's say we want to go to Google is boring. Classroom.google.com, right? Click me to go to Google Classroom. And we close the A tag. And an exception to like closing tags is the image element. you can actually just include the slash like right after, right before the greater than sign. Sorry. So here we have the click me to go to Google Classroom, and I assume if I click it, well, not here, but I click it like this, then it'll send me to Google Classroom. Amazing. Any questions? Any questions? I do not see any questions. I'll be moving on. So let's move on to some more attributes. So we have the ID attribute. So if you guys have a school ID, I assume many of you guys have a school ID. So it's pretty similar for HTML tags. You can assign them a unique ID that lets you know which one it is. And it might not seem very relevant right now, but it's very useful when we incorporate CSS and JavaScript. And then we have classes, which are very similar to IDs, but there is one big difference. Does anyone know? Can someone tell me in chat what the difference is between classes and IDs? I'll give you guys 10 seconds if anyone knows. Different word. Nice try. But this is actually good because it means you're learning. But classes, what you can do is you can assign this the same class value to multiple elements. So here I could have one element that has a class of beta and another element that has the same class of beta, right? But IDs have to be unique. I'm not sharing my school ID with someone else, right? But I could maybe have the same class value as someone else. So that's a bit of a difference. So here, let's see some more attributes, right? So here we have that image tag again, that shows up again. And we have the source attribute, as we've covered. We also have an alt attribute, a width attribute, and a height attribute. So I'd assume you guys know what width and height are. How long, how tall is the image. Does anyone know what alt is? What does alt mean? Any takers? Alternate? It does mean alternate, but what is that?
I think alt means like the subtext. Like if you hover your mouse over it, it kind of like lets you see what the image means.
Yeah, so that is true.
And I'm pretty sure it means alt text.
Yeah, it's like an alt text. So what happens is sometimes people have bad internet, right? Sometimes the image doesn't load. So yeah, alt shows is like the backup for if the image doesn't load. So if the image, let's say this image of a girl does not load, right? If you set the alt equal to image of a girl, if the image doesn't load because our internet is bad, it's just going to show this text itself. So we sort of know what it means even if we can't see the image itself. So let's move on. And let's go on to lists. So here's an example of how we do lists. So here the UL says that we should start a list, and it means unordered list, bullet points. And then the li elements are the list elements. They tell us what we should put for those bullet points. So can someone give me an example in Google Meet's chat of a list of, let's say, your favorite 3 foods? Favorite 3 foods in a list, an HTML list. No commas. It has to be HTML. Li means list element. It means, list. Oh, that's not E. It's an I. Interesting. But it is basically a list element. You can't enter it. Here's an example. UL. Oh, and you can't do multiple lines, huh? That's unfortunate. try to make it all in one line. So ignore the new lines. We have no takers. All right, I'll give a live example. Let's put it here. Let's say we have UL. Let me close it. Let's make sure we always close our stuff. I'm gonna do like copy paste this 3 times. 3 elements. I'm gonna do like what? I'm vegetarian, but I'm gonna put this anyways. Let's say Xiao Long Pao. And what's the third one gonna be? What's a good food? Say chicken wings. All of which are non-veg, but as you guys can see, the list shows. And then we also have ordered lists. So that's OL. And that's going to make it into numbers instead of bullet points. So here we're going to see 1, 2, 3. So that's how lists work, basically. So now we're going to move on to CSS. And thank you to April for providing some formatting, but it is unfortunately too late. Let's see if there's some other examples that could benefit from that. But yeah, CSS, it stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And what it is if HTML is like the structure of a website, CSS defines how it should look, how it should be pretty. So, this guy on the right, he's wearing an opera shirt, I believe. His name is Hakon William Lee. I think I butchered that pronunciation, but he made this. It's not a programming language again, but it's a styling language, I would say, and it describes how HTML elements should look. So CSS looks quite different from HTML. What you have first is you have a selector. So it tells you, what type of element do you want to change the looks of, and then you have these curly brackets, and that's where the majority of your styling is going to go. And then you have the property you want to change, colon.
People format the chip check.
I'm gonna mute you.
No problem.
So yeah, we have the property. We have the colon, which is what we're going to put next. We're going to put the value next, and then we have the value, which is what we want to change the property to. So, for example, here we are changing the color of all H1 elements to a color of blue, and we're making the font size 12 pixels, which might be a bit smaller than a normal header tag. So here's an example of where you could put your CSS. You can put it in a style block, a style element, should I say. So I'm going to give a live demonstration. But let's say we want to make a style block. Let's say we want all of our list to have red text, right? Chicken tikka masala and chicken wings, maybe they're red a lot of the time, right? So here we're going to do li, and we're going to say color red. I'm not quite sure if it's. There you go. So here we have a red list, right? And then maybe you want to make it have really large text, right? So we can say font size is going to be 100 pixels. That's a really big list, right? So CSS can make stuff look different, and that can be very useful if you want to make pretty websites, right? And then remember, you guys put it into a style block. So yeah, this is basically what I said. And now I want you guys to I have a challenge for you guys. So you guys were having problems entering multiple lines in Google Meets chat. I encourage you guys just to copy this and to paste it into chat. So let me try that right now. It does work. So try to code directly on W3 Schools, and then Control A, Control C, and then Control V onto Google Meets messages. And remember, the challenge is to write your name in the color blue. what's the link to W trace close? I'll link it again. All right, we have. Is that your mom's name? Sarita. I'll call you by Anirvan. So let's try your code. If I get to copy. Bada bing, bada boom. Let's try it out. We got your name, beautiful. And then we have Soham. Let's try that. So I'm not sure if that quite works, Soham. That's an incomplete piece of code. Yeah, it does not show anything, unfortunately. What you might need to do here is close the style block, apply it to H1, and make an H1 block with your name in it. And this works. And then we have Joel Sun, and this is the last guy we're going to be doing. Wait, H1? I just put H1 as an example. You could do it on a P block as well, like this. Amazing. So it seems like a lot of you guys know how to use CSS now. So we're going to move on. We are running short on time. So we can use, you know how we styled elements based on the name of the element, like H1, H2, and P tags and whatnot. Well, sometimes that can be a problem, right? Because we can have multiple H1 tags. So how do we make one H1 tag have a different style than another one? That's the question. Well, we can actually use the ID attribute we identified from earlier. So let's say we have two P tags. One is Joel Sun, and another is Kundan Baliga. Okay. So here it's going to have both of our names in blue. But what if we wanted only one of the names in blue and the other name in red? So here's a bit of a problem because both are P tags, right? There's nothing to distinguish it. But how about what we do is we give this an ID of Joel, and we give my P tag an ID of Kundan. And now what we can do is we can do hashtag. So hashtag is for IDs, to identify IDs. So we can say that hashtag Joel is hashtag Joel. So any elements with the ID of Joel will have the color blue. And we can do hashtag Kundan has the color of red. And that should work pretty well, I'd say. There we go. Right? We can see my name is red and Joel's name is blue. And then we can, let's be ambitious. Let's say text align. Let's say Joel's name is centered. And let's say mine is to the right. I think that should work. So this is not centered. So that might be a problem with something. Maybe this. There you go. So Joel's name is centered and mine is to the right. And that's how you can differentiate. It's pretty similar elements. And then just classes. So let's say we want multiple, let's say we have even more names, right? Let's say we have a P tag. And let's take someone from here. Let's say we have Sean, right? We have a Sean here. And let's find Baron. Got Baron as well. And let's say we want my name and Joel's name to have red text. We want Sean's and Baron's name to have blue text. However, we can't assign my name and Joel's name the same ID, right? Because IDs are unique to one element or one person. So here we can use a class variable. So we can say blue names. We can assign me and Joel to blue names. And we can assign Sean and Baron to red names. And in classes, they don't use hashtags to identify the class, but they use a dot. So here we can do dot blue names, and here we can do dot red names. And here it should show my name and Joel's name using these rules, color blue and text line center. And Sean and Baron have these stylings. They have color red and text line right. So that's a bit about how classes work. They're more useful than IDs if you want multiple elements to have the same class, which you cannot do with IDs. Okay, so yeah, this is a bit of an example of how you can use IDs in classes. And I can give you guys a few seconds to absorb this into your minds. Not necessarily the actual like text, but how CSS and HTML is all working together in this example. All right, so a few seconds are up. We have a lot to cover. We're going to cover the universal selector. So what a universal selector says is we're going to assign everything the same thing. So here you can do every element has font size of 100 pixels. So here, these don't really matter. But what matters is the asterisk. The asterisk says match everything and get all of these elements and make them all really big. So that's the universal selector. And we're not going to go over this. What we're going to do is we're going to do inline styling. So there's this thing called the style attribute. And what it allows you to do is instead of having the style block where you can define CSS, you can put CSS into the elements themselves. So here, let's say we have, let's remove this. Let's say we have Joel has a style attribute, and then we can put CSS into this. And we don't need selectors. We can directly put the type, the value. Forgot the terminology, but for example, the color and the value or whatever else you're trying to change. So for example, here we can have color of red. Make his name red. Here, for example, I could do text align center. So here's name would be centered, and I can do the same for my name. Font size. Let's make my name large. Amazing. So style attribute can be used in that sense. And you got to end every single CSS rule or every style with a semicolon. Forgot to mention that. And then, yeah, you can use background color as well. So there's the background color attribute. And then there's a bunch of HTML colors. One of the examples is light blue. And then here we're applying it to body. So body is just like the entire HTML page. As I said, the bulk of the content, what the user sees. And then we can even like change the background color or background image. So here I found like a random image, for example, from the internet. It seems to be someone holding a RAM stick, but I put that under the background image attribute with a special function. You guys don't really need to know this for CSS. It's a bit niche, but there's a lot of things you can do, as you can see with CSS, and that's what makes it so useful for people who make websites at these websites like Google. And then there's a div element. So what divs do is they're just a container. So they're not useful by themselves, but they're useful if you want to put something in something else. So if we put this in a div, right, nothing's going to change. But what we can do with these divs is, for example, we can say, what did I put here? I said border is 5 pixels solid green. So let's say we want a green background. So here, see, we have this big box around our names. So that's where divs come in handy. You can surround stuff. And then here are a bunch of attributes that are useful in CSS. You can change color, background color, font size, the type of font. There's different types of fonts, Roboto, Verdana. There's margin, padding. There's width, height. There's the border type, as I just showed. Display shows whether it's hidden or showing, how far it should be from top, right, bottom, left, and so on and so forth. And then we're going to try to sneak in JavaScript into like 3 minutes. But JavaScript was made by this guy called Brendan Eich. And what JavaScript does is it adds interactivity to a website. and it also communicates with the backend. So JavaScript is a bit different from HTML and CSS, and you guys can see it over here. And before even that, what do you need to do? You know how CSS, you need to surround CSS in a style script, in a style element. For JavaScript, you need to surround code into a script element. So here, for example, what we're doing is we're getting the document variable, which is defined by default on these web pages. And we're getting an element by the ID demo, and we're setting its text inside to my first JavaScript. So here, even though this p tag is empty, this JavaScript adds this text into it. And then, yeah, that's what inner HTML does. And the nice thing about JavaScript is you can do calculations and you can do operations. So here, for example, you can make a variable, use the let keyword in order to define a variable. Here we're letting x equal 5 and let y equal 6, and we're letting z equal x plus y. So z is 11, and then we're setting the element of that has an ID of demo to this text. The value of z is, and then z, which is 11, and here you can see that works. So yeah, we have numbers, strings. This is very similar to Python. We have booleans, which are lowercase in JavaScript, unlike Python. We have objects, which are quite similar to dictionaries. We have arrays, which in Python are called lists. And then here we have an example of a date object. So yeah, here's another example of what we can do. Here we're using try and catch. So if an error comes from here, for example, here we are defining a variable called pi as a constant. So constants you cannot change. However, we tried to redefine it as 3.14, and this will raise an error, right? Because we're trying to redefine a constant. So this catch block will catch it, I guess is what to say. And then it'll print what the error was. So here it's going to be type error assignment to constant variable. So here we're going to skip the challenge because we need to get to homework quickly. But there's also functions. Functions let you do operations, blocks of code multiple times. So here we're defining a function that can multiply a and b. So when we call it with arguments of 4 and 3, it gives us the product of those two numbers, which is 12. There's arrays, which are quite similar to Python. You can just use your knowledge from that. And finally, we have moved on to homework. We have finally reached the end on a time crunch. But what your homework is I want you guys to make a web page, and I want you to use this W3 Schools editor and make this web page all about you. So some examples of what you can do with this web page: you can add your name, you can add your favorite foods, as I was saying, your favorite sports, what games you play, and here are some required elements. These slides will be posted later on, so you can use them for reference. So don't fret about that. But what you guys are required to do is you're required to have bold text on your webpage. You need a link to a website that you like, a background that is not white, so that can be blue, black, brown, and you need text of different sizes, which uses font size, which you guys can see in previous slides. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions? No? All right. Well, I think we can end it there. So thank you so much for, this is only day 1 of web development, right? By the way, there's a lot of theory and concepts related to web development that we'll be covering next Monday. But thank you guys so much. You guys can leave now.